What if the child you just saved from dying turned out to be the one you lost years ago? Rain poured relentlessly over the cracked sidewalks of downtown Chicago, each droplet slicing through the cold night air like needles of regret. Cars rushed past without slowing down, their headlights briefly illuminating a man slumped beside a flickering streetlight, a man who used to have a name, a home, and a reason to wake up. Now, everyone just called him that homeless guy by the corner store. His real name was Daniel Reeves. His coat, soaked and torn, clung to his frame as he sat with an old coffee cup in front of him, waiting for the rare sound of coins. He had long stopped expecting kindness. The world, he'd learned, had a cruel way of looking right through you once you had nothing left to give. That night was colder than usual. Wind howled through the alleys, whispering secrets no one wanted to hear. But beneath all that noise, Daniel's ears caught something else. A sound that didn't belong. A scream. It was faint at first, then sharper, a child's voice somewhere near the end of the block. Daniel froze. The traffic masked most of it, but then came another sound, the screech of tires, the crash of metal. Without thinking, Daniel ran. His bare hands slapped against wet pavement as he turned the corner toward a small intersection. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from instinct. And there she was, a little girl, no more than 7, standing frozen in the middle of the road, her eyes wide, a car speeding toward her. Daniel didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, pushing the girl out of harm's way just as the car swerved and slammed into a street pole. The world spun. The sound of the impact echoed in his skull. And then, silence. When Daniel came to, his head throbbed and his vision blurred. The little girl sat beside him, crying softly. Her pink jacket was torn at the sleeve, but she was alive, alive because of him. "You're okay," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You're okay, sweetheart." The girl nodded weakly, clutching a small teddy bear that had fallen from her hands. Her face, something about it froze Daniel where he lay. The shape of her eyes, the small dimple on her left cheek when she tried to stop crying. It was like looking at a ghost. "Hey!" a woman's voice shouted from behind. A young mother came running down the sidewalk, panic etched across her face. She scooped the girl into her arms, sobbing, whispering her name over and over. Emily. Emily. Daniel's chest tightened. That name tore through him like a knife, pulling him back through years of fog and pain. His own daughter had been named Emily. The last time he'd seen her, she was 5, standing on the porch with tears in her eyes as he was taken away in handcuffs. He'd lost everything that day, his job, his wife, his home, and her. The mother turned to him, still shaken. You saved her," she said, tears running down her cheeks. "Thank you, sir." Daniel tried to speak, but his voice cracked. The words wouldn't come. Then, as the police and ambulance arrived, the woman handed him a small blanket. "You're bleeding," she said softly. "Please, let them check you." Daniel shook his head. He didn't want to stay. He didn't want questions. He just wanted to look at the little girl again, at Emily, to make sure she was real. But as the flashing lights painted the night red and blue, he slipped away into the shadows before anyone could stop him. He sat beneath an old bridge that night, the city's noise fading behind him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, and that name echoing over and over in his head. Emily. It couldn't be her. It was impossible. His daughter was gone. His ex-wife had moved to another state after the divorce, and he'd never heard from them again. But then, how could a stranger's child look exactly like her? For the first time in years, Daniel couldn't sleep. The next morning, he found himself back near the same street corner, not begging this time, but watching. From a distance, he saw the mother again. She was walking Emily to a nearby park. Her hands trembled as she held her daughter close, scanning the street nervously, still shaken from last night's near tragedy. Daniel followed. Not out of malice, but out of something deeper. A need to know. At the park, Emily laughed again, chasing pigeons across the wet grass, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. Daniel stood by the fence, his eyes glassy. The sound of her laughter was almost identical to what he remembered. The same tiny, bell-like tone that used to fill their old apartment before everything went wrong. He remembered that day, the one that ended it all. He'd been driving home late after losing his job. There'd been drinking, an argument with his wife, Claire, one moment of anger, one careless shove, and then the sirens, the shouting, the court dates. Claire had taken Emily and vanished before he could even apologize. He served time for assault. By the time he got out, they were gone. And now, years later, a little girl who looked just like his Emily was right there. He waited until the mother got up to take a phone call, stepping a few feet away. Then Daniel, hesitating, approached the playground slowly. "Hi," he said softly. The girl looked up from her swing, curious but unafraid. "You're the man from last night," she said. Daniel nodded, his voice catching. "Yeah. Are you okay?" She smiled, that same dimple appearing again. "Mom says you're a hero." Daniel chuckled weakly. "I don't know about that." She tilted her head. "You look sad." He swallowed. "Sometimes people are sad when they remember something good they lost." The girl frowned, thinking. Then, almost instinctively, she reached out and handed him her teddy bear. "Here," she said. "He helps when I'm sad." Daniel felt his throat tighten. The bear, brown with a stitch paw and a faded ribbon, looked identical to the one he'd given his daughter for her 5th birthday. He turned it over, and there, faintly stitched on the back of its ear, were 2 letters. E.R. Emily Reeves. The world seemed to stop. Daniel's vision blurred, his chest heavy with disbelief. The air felt thin. He looked up at the girl, her curious eyes watching him closely, and realized the impossible truth. It was her. Before he could say anything, the mother returned, her eyes widening as she recognized him. "You!" she gasped. "What are you doing here?" Daniel stepped back, words tumbling out. "Please, I didn't mean, I just wanted to—" But she grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her away. "Stay away from us," she said sharply. "Don't come near my daughter again." Daniel didn't move. He just stood there, watching them leave. The rain began again, soft at first, then heavier, washing over him as he fell to his knees. Later that night, as he sat under the same bridge, he pulled out the teddy bear. She had dropped it in the rush. His hands shook as he held it close, staring at the tiny initials stitched into the fabric. That little girl had no idea who he was. To her, he was just a stranger, a man who'd saved her life and then disappeared back into the shadows. But to him, she was everything. The next day, Daniel made a decision. He needed to find Claire, to tell her he'd changed, that he wasn't the man he used to be, that their daughter deserved to know the truth. He spent the next few days asking around, small grocery stores, old shelters, even public records offices. Each dead end chipped away at his hope, but he refused to stop. Until one evening, while rummaging through the trash behind a coffee shop, a familiar voice called out from the alleyway. It was the mother, Claire. She stood there, frozen, a paper bag in her hands, eyes glistening under the dim streetlight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years between them hung heavy in the air, years of silence, anger, and pain. Finally, Claire whispered, "Why did you come back, Daniel?" He looked up, tears mixing with the rain. "Because I didn't know what I was looking for until I found her." Claire's hands trembled. "You should have stayed gone." Daniel nodded slowly. "Maybe. But tell me one thing, Claire. Does she know who I am?" Claire's lips parted, but she didn't answer. Behind her, a small figure appeared. Emily, holding her mother's hand, staring curiously at the man beneath the bridge. And in that quiet, rain-soaked moment, their eyes met again. Neither spoke. The air between them felt alive, heavy with everything unsaid. Daniel finally whispered, his voice breaking, "Hi, sweetheart." Emily blinked, confused, her hand tightening around her mother's. "Mom?" she asked softly. "Who is he?" And as lightning split the sky above them, Daniel realized this meeting wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning. The air hung still between them, heavy, cold, and unbearably quiet. Raindrops slid down Claire's face, glimmering like tears under the pale glow of a streetlight. Emily clung to her mother's arm, watching the man with cautious curiosity. Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. Every muscle in his body screamed to reach out, to explain, to say the words he'd been waiting years to say. "I'm your father." But his voice failed him again, caught somewhere between hope and guilt. Claire finally looked away. "We should go," she whispered, her voice trembling. She turned, guiding Emily down the street, her steps quick and unsteady. Daniel stayed frozen beneath the bridge, the sound of their footsteps echoing until it faded completely. Then the silence returned, the kind that pressed down on you, that made you feel the weight of every mistake you'd ever made. He looked down at the teddy bear still in his hands, now damp and stained with mud, and whispered, "I just wanted to see her one last time." But deep down, he knew it wasn't enough. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time Daniel closed his eyes, he saw Emily's face, that same spark in her eyes that his little girl once had when she used to run into his arms after work. He saw the birthday cake he missed, the school play he never attended, the bedtime stories he never got to finish. Regret gnawed at him like hunger. The next morning, Daniel made a choice. He wasn't going to disappear this time. Not again. He found a nearby shelter, a run-down church basement that served coffee, soup, and a thin blanket to whoever came early enough. He signed his name on the clipboard at the door, Daniel Reeves. It had been years since he'd written it anywhere. The letters looked foreign to him, like a name belonging to someone who used to exist. The shelter's volunteer, an older man named Frank, looked him up and down. "You new here?" Daniel nodded. "Just trying to get back on my feet." Frank smiled faintly. "That's what this place is for." Over the next few weeks, Daniel kept himself busy. He swept floors, repaired broken chairs, and helped unload food trucks when they came in. It was the first steady rhythm he'd had in years, the first time he felt part of something again. But even as he worked, Emily never left his mind. Every street corner, every laughter of a passing child pulled him back to her. He kept his distance, afraid of scaring her mother again, but sometimes, when the park was quiet, he'd sit at the far end of the fence, just to hear Emily's laughter echo through the wind. Then one evening, Frank found him sitting outside the shelter, staring blankly at the skyline. "You've got that look," Frank said, lighting a cigarette. "The kind that says you left something behind you can't stop thinking about." Daniel hesitated. "Someone," he said softly. Frank nodded. "Someone usually means family." Daniel's silence was answer enough. Frank took a drag and exhaled slowly. "You can't fix the past, son, but sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a chance to make peace with it. Don't waste it." Those words lingered with Daniel. Days passed, then weeks. One afternoon, while sorting boxes behind the church, Daniel overheard a familiar voice at the front. Claire's. His heart nearly stopped. He peeked around the corner and saw her speaking with the pastor. She looked tired, older, her once polished confidence replaced by a weary kind of grace. In her hand was a small envelope. "I just wanted to donate," she was saying. "You help people like people who've lost their way. That matters." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Before she could leave, Daniel stepped forward. "Claire." She froze, turning slowly. For a moment, neither spoke. The world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them. The hum of the fluorescent light above, the faint sound of children laughing outside, and the silence between two people who once shared everything. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone sharp, but her eyes softer than before. "I work here," he said quietly, trying to get clean, trying to be someone she could be proud of. Claire looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "You shouldn't have come near her." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry. I didn't plan to, but when I saw her in that street, I just acted. I didn't even think. Then I saw her face, and it was like the world stopped." Claire looked away, her jaw tight. "You lost that right, Daniel." "I know," he said again, "but she deserves to know the truth, someday." "She's happy," Claire snapped. "She doesn't remember you, and I want to keep it that way." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't argue. He just nodded, his voice trembling. "Then let me do one thing, just one." Claire hesitated. "What?" "Let me write her a letter," he said. "She doesn't have to read it now. You can keep it. Give it to her when she's older, when she's ready." Claire looked at him for a long time, long enough for the years between them to melt away just a little. Finally, she nodded once. "One letter. Then you stay away." Daniel smiled faintly, the first real smile in years. "That's all I need." That night, he borrowed a pen and paper from Frank and sat by the shelter window, the streetlight casting a faint glow on the page. His hands trembled as he began to write. "Dear Emily, you don't know me the way you should. You don't know the sound of my voice when I tell you bedtime stories, or the way I used to carry you on my shoulders when you were small. You don't know the mistakes I made, or how much they cost me. But what you should know is that the day I saw you again, I remembered what it means to live. You saved me, even though you don't know it yet." The letter went on for pages, memories, regrets, hopes. When he finished, the ink had smudged from tears. He folded it carefully and sealed it in an envelope, writing her name in shaky letters, Emily Reeves. He handed it to Claire the next morning. She didn't open it, just took it, nodded once, and walked away. For a while, life found a fragile rhythm. Daniel worked, saved what little he could, even managed to rent a small room above the diner 2 blocks from the shelter. He started seeing things differently, the way the sunrise spilled gold across the rooftops, the laughter from kids walking to school, the way hope sometimes came quietly, like a soft whisper instead of a shout. But peace never lasts long for a man who's run from his past. One rainy afternoon, Frank called him into the church office. "Daniel," he said gently, "there's someone here to see you." Daniel frowned. When he stepped into the hall, his heart nearly stopped again. It was Emily, standing there in her school uniform, her hair in a ponytail, holding the very letter he had written. "I found this," she said quietly, "in Mom's drawer." Daniel's throat went dry. "She let you read it?" Emily shook her head. "She doesn't know I did." She took a hesitant step closer. "Is it true? Are you my dad?" For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. His eyes welled with tears. "Yes," he whispered, "I am." Emily looked down at the letter, then back up at him. "Why did you go away?" Daniel sank to his knees, his voice breaking. "Because I made mistakes, sweetheart. Big ones. I thought staying away would protect you, but I was wrong." Emily stared at him, her eyes glistening. Then slowly, she reached out and placed her small hand in his. "I don't remember you," she said softly. "But when I saw you that night, I felt like I did." Daniel's breath caught. He held her hand gently, afraid that any movement might break the fragile moment. "That means everything," he whispered. Suddenly the church door swung open. Claire stood there, frozen, her face pale. "Emily!" she cried, rushing forward. "What are you doing here?" Emily turned. "Mom, please, I just wanted to talk to him." Claire's eyes filled with tears, her voice shaking. "You shouldn't have—" She stopped mid-sentence, looking at Daniel, at the exhaustion in his eyes, at the sincerity carved into his face. He wasn't the same man she'd left behind. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then quietly she whispered, "You found her." Daniel nodded. "I didn't plan to. She found me." Claire looked down at their joined hands. "I don't know if I can forgive everything," she said softly. "But maybe she deserves to know the kind of man you're trying to be." Daniel's voice trembled. "That's all I've ever wanted." The three of them stood there in silence as the rain outside eased into a soft drizzle, sunlight breaking through the clouds like a quiet promise. Later that evening, as Claire walked Emily home, Daniel stayed by the church steps, watching them disappear down the street. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He turned his face toward the fading sky and whispered, "Thank you." But as he reached into his coat pocket for the small locket he kept, the one that once held a picture of them together, he noticed something else inside, a folded piece of paper. He opened it. It was his letter. But another note had been added beneath his words. In Claire's handwriting it read, "She knows now, and maybe one day she'll remember the man who saved her life, not as a stranger, but as her father." Daniel closed his eyes, a single tear falling as the city lights flickered on one by one. He didn't know what the future held. Maybe they'd never fully rebuild what was lost, but for the first time there was a chance, a fragile, precious chance, to start again. And as he stood there, in the quiet evening light, a distant voice called from the corner. "Hey, Dad, you coming tomorrow?" He turned. Emily stood beside her mother, waving shyly. Daniel smiled through the tears. "I'll be there," he said. But deep in his chest a shadow lingered, a sense that something still waited to be uncovered, a truth he hadn't yet faced. And as the night deepened around him, Daniel realized this story, their story, was far from over. The following days unfolded like a fragile dream Daniel didn't want to wake from. For the first time in a decade, he felt tethered to something real, to someone real. Emily began stopping by the shelter after school, with her mother's reluctant permission, sometimes bringing him sandwiches wrapped in foil or drawings she'd made during class. She'd talk about school, about her friends, about a cat she wanted but couldn't have because their apartment didn't allow pets. Daniel would listen, drinking in every word, afraid to blink and lose the moment. There was a quiet rhythm forming, small, hesitant, but steady. The kind of rhythm only people scarred by the same absence could understand. Claire, though cautious, began softening too. She no longer turned away when Daniel spoke to Emily. She even stayed once or twice, standing silently by the doorway while they talked, as if trying to see for herself whether he had truly changed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, turning the streets gold and crimson, Daniel walked Emily home. They passed a mural of bright blues and yellows painted across a cracked brick wall. Emily stopped and pointed. "That's my favorite one," she said. "Mum says it used to be ugly, but someone painted over it so people wouldn't forget what used to be here." Daniel smiled faintly. "Sometimes you have to paint over what hurts to remember what matters." Emily tilted her head. "Did you do that?" He laughed softly. "I'm still trying." But beneath the warmth of that moment, something restless stirred in him, a quiet unease he couldn't name. Every time he looked at Emily, pride and love warred with guilt and fear. The more he became part of her life again, the more he felt the weight of the past pressing closer, like a shadow waiting for its chance to return. That shadow came sooner than he expected. One rainy Thursday, as Daniel closed up the shelter, Frank handed him a brown envelope. "This came for you," he said. "No return address." Daniel frowned, tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words. "No name, no signature. You don't deserve them. Leave before she finds out what really happened." The note slipped from his hands, landing in a puddle on the floor. The words burned into his mind. What really happened? He read them over and over, heart pounding, breath shallow. For years he'd accepted what he remembered: the fight, the shove, the arrest. But something about that night had always been hazy, clouded by alcohol and rage. He told himself it didn't matter anymore. But now, someone wanted him gone. Frank saw his expression. "You okay?" Daniel forced a nod. "Yeah, just junk." But it wasn't. That night he couldn't sleep. The city outside his window pulsed with light and sound, but inside there was only darkness. He reached for the drawer beside his bed, pulling out an old photograph, the last one he had of him, Claire and Emily, taken before everything fell apart. He stared at it for a long time, searching for something he'd missed all these years. The next day, he went back to the neighborhood where they used to live, a small, weathered apartment complex now half abandoned and crumbling. The front gate creaked open like it was warning him not to enter. Inside, the air smelled of rust and old rain. He climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, to the door he once called home. The paint was peeling, but his old number, 2B, was still faintly visible beneath the grime. He stood there for a long time before knocking. An elderly woman opened the door, her face lined but kind. "Can I help you?" "I used to live here," Daniel said softly, "years ago, with my family." She nodded slowly. "Ah, you must be the man they talked about." Daniel's chest tightened. "What did they say?" The woman leaned against the frame. "That there was an accident, a fall. Your wife hit her head on the table and you took the blame." Daniel's breath caught. "What did you just say?" She frowned. "That's how I remember it. The cops came. You were shouting for help. They said you pushed her, but I heard different. There was another man here earlier that night, a friend of hers, I think. They were arguing before you even showed up." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Do you remember his name?" She shook her head. "No, but I remember his car. A blue Buick. Parked out front almost every night for weeks." He stepped back, his mind spinning. A blue Buick. He remembered flashes, headlights through the blinds, a voice shouting, the sound of glass breaking. But he'd been too drunk to piece it together. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible. He stumbled out into the street, the cold air hitting him like a wave. All these years he'd believed he was the monster, that he'd destroyed his family. But what if the truth was different? What if someone had wanted him gone? That thought clung to him like a fever. He began asking questions quietly, at the diner, at the old corner store, even with a retired cop who used to patrol the area. Every time he mentioned Claire's name, people hesitated. Some said they remembered the case. Others said it had been messy, with missing reports and contradictions. But then, one night, Frank handed him another envelope. This time, no note, just a photograph. It was Claire, much younger, standing beside a man Daniel didn't recognize. The man was tall, with a sharp jaw and cold eyes, and behind them, in the corner of the frame, was a car, a blue Buick. Daniel's stomach turned. He flipped the photo over. Scrawled on the back in fading ink were 3 words: "She never told you." He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the photo, trying to steady his breathing. The edges trembled in his hands. If Claire had hidden this, what else hadn't she told him? The next morning he went to see her. She was waiting outside Emily's school, holding an umbrella, her gaze softening when she saw him approach, until she noticed the photo in his hand. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharp. "Who is he, Claire?" She didn't answer. Her jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have gone digging." "I deserve to know," Daniel said, his tone low but steady. "Was he there that night?" Claire's lips parted, but no sound came out. Then she turned away, whispering, "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," Daniel pressed. Finally she met his eyes. "He was a friend. Someone who helped me when things got bad between us. You were drinking, Daniel. You were angry all the time. I didn't know what else to do." Daniel felt the words hit him like a blow. "So you were with him?" "It wasn't like that," she snapped. "He wasn't supposed to be there that night. He came to tell me he was leaving town. You came home early and things went wrong." Daniel stared at her, 100 emotions colliding at once. Confusion, betrayal, heartbreak. "You let me believe I hurt you. You let me rot in a cell thinking I destroyed my own family." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I tried to tell the truth. They didn't listen. The police had their story and I was scared. I thought keeping quiet would protect Emily." Daniel stepped back, rain beginning to fall again, soaking through his jacket. "You didn't protect her," he said quietly. "You erased me." Claire's tears mixed with the rain. "If I could change it, I would." But Daniel was already walking away. That night, the storm broke over the city, violent and relentless. Daniel sat by the window of his small room, the photograph on the table beside him, Claire's words replaying in his mind. Outside, thunder rolled like an accusation. He looked at the photo again, at the man's face. Something about it nagged at him, something just out of reach. He flipped it over, squinting at the faint stamp in the corner. A logo of a construction company, Lakeside Developments. The name sent a chill through him. That company had recently been in the news. New housing projects, major investors, and one CEO whose face he'd seen on a flyer just last week. The same man from the photograph. The man Claire called a friend. Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. He pulled on his coat and ran into the storm, the streets slick and glistening under neon reflections. He found the company's office downtown, sleek glass and steel rising above the rain. Closed for the night, but through the front doors he could see the lobby, a wall of framed photos of the CEO smiling beside city officials. The nameplate below read, "Richard Hayes," the man who'd been in his home the night everything fell apart. Daniel pressed his hand against the glass, his reflection distorted by the water streaming down the window. He could feel the old anger rising again. But this time, it wasn't blind. It was cold, focused. Someone had taken 10 years of his life, twisted his memories, broken his family. And now that someone was powerful, untouchable, hiding behind success and reputation. Daniel turned away from the glass, rain soaking his face, and whispered to himself, "He took everything from me. Not anymore." Lightning flashed, illuminating the street for an instant, and in that brief flicker, Daniel saw his own reflection staring back at him from a puddle. He barely recognized the man looking back, eyes filled with fire and something darker. The storm raged on, echoing his heartbeat, as he disappeared into the night, carrying the photograph in his fist like a promise. For years, Daniel had been trying to remember who he was. Now, he was starting to remember what he'd lost, and who had stolen it. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the guilt, the love, the grief, something dangerous was beginning to wake. The city didn't sleep that night. Rain still hammered the pavement, relentless, washing the streets in a feverish shimmer of red and gold from the traffic lights. Daniel moved through it like a ghost, his soaked jacket clinging to him, the photograph crumpled in his hand. The air felt alive, charged, the kind of night where something irreversible was about to happen. He didn't go home. He couldn't. He walked aimlessly, replaying every memory he thought he knew, the night of the accident, the courtroom, Claire's face when she testified, Emily's cries muffled in the gallery. Everything had seemed so clear back then. He was guilty, the monster everyone said he was. But now the truth refused to stay buried. A stranger's name, a blue Buick, a memory blurred by fear and alcohol. Richard Hayes. The name pulsed in his mind like a heartbeat. Daniel found himself standing outside a newsstand, its fluorescent sign flickering weakly. He stared at a row of glossy business magazines stacked near the window. There, on the cover, was Hayes, smiling confidently, shaking hands with the mayor. The caption read, "Richard Hayes, the visionary behind Chicago's renewal." Daniel's reflection stared back from the glass, rain streaking down his face like tears. Renewal. The word made him laugh bitterly under his breath. Renewal built on ruins, on his ruin. He tore the magazine from the rack and flipped it open, scanning the article with shaking hands. Midway through, a quote caught his eye, a line that felt too deliberate, too familiar. Every setback is just the foundation for something greater. His stomach turned. That was his phrase, something he used to say to Claire when things went wrong, when bills piled up, when hope was running thin. She used to tease him for it. You and your foundations. How would Hayes know that? The rain grew heavier, drumming against the awning like restless fingers. Daniel's pulse quickened. The idea formed slowly, sickeningly, until it was no longer an idea. It was certainty. Hayes hadn't just been in his home that night. He'd been part of it. By morning, Daniel's exhaustion had turned into clarity, the kind that comes when pain stops being abstract and starts having a face. He needed proof, something concrete. He waited outside the Lakeside Development's office until the first employees began arriving. Then he slipped in quietly, posing as a maintenance worker. Years of living invisible had taught him how not to be noticed. Inside, the lobby smelled of lemon polish and money. A receptionist smiled absently as he walked past with a mop bucket, nodding as if he belonged. The elevator hummed softly as it climbed. On the top floor, the doors opened to a sleek glass corridor overlooking the city, the kind of view that belonged to men who believed they owned the world. Hayes's office door was ajar. Daniel stepped inside. The room was sterile, precise. Black marble desk, silver accents, a wall of photographs documenting Hayes's rise from a construction foreman to a tycoon. But what caught Daniel's eye was the single-framed photo on the credenza. Hayes, younger, standing in front of a modest house. His house. The breath left Daniel's lungs. He moved closer. Behind Hayes in the photo, through the open front door, a familiar curtain pattern hung in the window. Claire's old floral print. There was no mistaking it. Hayes had kept a trophy. Daniel's hands trembled as he picked it up. He turned the frame over and found an inscription carved into the wood. The night everything changed. The sound of a door creaking behind him froze him in place. "Can I help you?" Hayes stood at the threshold, calm and immovable, his voice smooth as glass. He was older now, his hair grey at the temples, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating. Daniel set the frame down slowly. "You remember me?" Hayes studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Of course I do. You're the man who took the fall." The words hit like a fist. Daniel took a step closer. "You were there that night." Hayes's smile didn't falter. "You were drunk, Daniel. You don't remember what you saw." "I remember enough." Hayes leaned against the desk, utterly at ease. "Do you?" Because from where I stood, it looked like a man who couldn't control his temper finally snapped. Convenient, really. Gave me an opportunity to take care of Claire and her daughter, while you disappeared. Daniel's fists clenched. "You were seeing her." Hayes tilted his head, almost amused. "She needed stability. You were chaos." Daniel's voice cracked. "You ruined my life." Hayes shrugged. "You ruined it yourself. I just built something from the ashes." The rain outside blurred the skyline into streaks of grey. Daniel could feel the old rage returning, that storm inside him threatening to break free. He took a step forward. "She never told me the truth because she was afraid of you, wasn't she?" Hayes's expression hardened. "Careful what stories you tell yourself. The truth doesn't always save people. Sometimes it destroys them." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You destroyed us already." For a long moment neither moved. Then Hayes smiled again, that same detached confidence that had made him untouchable for years. "Walk away, Daniel. You've got your daughter back. Don't drag her through this again." But Daniel didn't move. He stood there, drenched in silence, realizing the power in Hayes's words, the arrogance of a man who thought he could rewrite the past. He finally turned and walked out, clutching the photo. Outside, the air felt heavier, darker. Each step echoed like a countdown. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew one thing: he couldn't let Hayes keep his lie buried. That night, Daniel met Claire at the park, the same spot where Emily used to play. She looked uneasy the moment she saw him, the photograph still wet from the rain clutched in his hand. "I talked to him," Daniel said quietly. Her face paled. "You shouldn't have." "You knew," he said. "You knew he was there. You knew he let me take the fall." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I tried to tell the police, but he made it clear what would happen if I did. He said he'd take Emily away. He had money, lawyers, friends. I didn't know how to fight him." Daniel stared at her, disbelief and heartbreak colliding. "You let me live in hell because you were scared?" Claire's voice cracked. "I was protecting her. You think I slept at night knowing what I did? You think I didn't see your face every time she looked at me?" The wind howled through the park, scattering dead leaves across the path. Daniel took a step back, his voice shaking. "He's still controlling you." She wiped her eyes. "He's dangerous, Daniel. Don't go after him, please." He looked down at the photo again, at Hayes standing in front of the house, smiling like a man who owned everything. "He's not going to stop unless someone makes him." Claire reached for his arm, desperate. "If you do this, he'll destroy you again. He'll take Emily." Daniel met her eyes. "Not this time. Not this." He turned and walked away, the storm beginning again above them, thunder rolling over the skyline. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about Hayes's words. The truth doesn't always save people. Maybe that was true, but lies had already destroyed too much. He spent hours in the dim light of his room, spreading out what little evidence he had, the photograph, the notes, the letters. But then, as he studied the photo again, something caught his eye. In the corner of the frame, barely visible through the window behind Hayes, was a reflection, part of a uniform, a badge glinting faintly. Someone else had been there. Daniel's pulse quickened. A police officer. He turned the photo under the light again, heart pounding. If an officer had witnessed that night and kept quiet, maybe Hayes's influence went deeper than he imagined. Maybe this wasn't just a personal betrayal. Maybe it was something much bigger. The phone on the bedside table rang suddenly, shattering the silence. Daniel froze. Hardly anyone had his number. He picked it up slowly. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, almost casual. "You should stop digging, Daniel." "Who is this?" A pause. Then the same calm voice said, "You don't want your daughter to grow up without a father twice." The line went dead. Daniel stood there, frozen, the phone trembling in his hand. The city noise outside seemed to fade, replaced by the hollow echo of that warning. He set the receiver down and looked out the window. Across the street, under a flickering streetlight, a dark car idled, engine humming softly. A blue Buick, the same model, the same shape. His chest tightened. Slowly the car pulled away, vanishing into the rain. The world felt smaller now, tighter, suffocating. Every instinct told him to run, but something stronger kept him still. Fear had stolen years from him already. He wasn't going to give it another day. He turned from the window, his reflection ghosted in the glass, and whispered to himself, "If they want me gone, they'll have to finish what they started." The storm outside reached its breaking point, lightning splitting the sky in jagged white lines. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like an omen, shaking the city awake. Daniel didn't know it yet, but the next step he took would bring everything, the lies, the guilt, the buried truth, crashing into the open. And as the storm raged above, one question burned through his mind, relentless and unshakable. If the truth costs everything you love, is it still worth telling? The storm had swallowed the night whole. Streets glistened under the yellow glare of streetlights, puddles trembling with every rumble of thunder. Daniel moved through the rain like a shadow, soaked, silent, deliberate. The photograph was tucked inside his jacket, the corners worn and soft, like a memory he couldn't let go of. Every step brought him closer to the truth and to the man who'd stolen his life. He didn't have a plan anymore. Plans were for people with safety nets. All he had was the truth, raw, fractured and dangerous, and tonight he was done running from it. The Lakeside Developments building loomed ahead, all steel and glass, reflecting the storm's fury. It was late, long past closing hours, but light still burned in the top-floor office. Hayes's office, the perfect man, working late to keep his empire spotless. Daniel found the side entrance unguarded, his footsteps echoing softly in the corridor. Every hum of fluorescent light, every distant drip of water felt amplified. He could hear his own heart, steady, defiant. He climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator. His hands brushed along the cold railing as he ascended, every step heavier than the last. Images flashed through his mind, Emily's eyes, Claire's trembling voice, the photograph's haunting reflection. When he reached the top, the door to Hayes's office stood slightly open. Inside, Hayes sat behind his desk, tie loosened, a drink in his hand, eyes fixed on the city beyond the glass. He didn't look surprised when Daniel stepped inside. "I was wondering when you'd come back," Hayes said softly without turning. "You don't strike me as the type to let things go." Daniel's voice was calm, low. "You took everything from me, my life, my family. You stood there that night, and you let me burn for it." Hayes finally turned, setting his glass down. "You keep telling yourself that story, but stories aren't truth, Daniel. They're what we use to survive it." Daniel stepped closer. "Then tell me your version. What really happened?" Hayes studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed, almost weary. "You really want to know? Fine. That night your wife called me. She said you were drinking again, that you were angry. She asked me to come by. I arrived just as you were shouting in the yard. I tried to calm you down. You pushed me. You went inside. Then I heard the crash, glass, screams, and I saw her fall. By the time I ran in, it was too late." Daniel shook his head. "You're lying." "Am I?" Hayes leaned back, eyes cold. "You were blackout drunk. You don't remember a thing. Everyone saw you drag her down those steps. The police didn't need convincing." Daniel's jaw tightened. "There was a cop there, in your photo. I saw the badge." Hayes's expression flickered, just a fraction, but enough. "Who was he?" Daniel pressed. Hayes stood, walking toward the window. "You really should have left this alone." Daniel's chest ached with a familiar heat, anger and grief twisted together. "You had help covering it up. You made sure no one questioned it." Hayes turned sharply. "I saved your daughter. You think she'd have survived with a man like you? I gave her stability, a future. You gave her shame." The words sliced deep, but Daniel didn't move. "You don't get to justify stealing my life." Hayes's lips curled into something cruel. "I didn't steal it. You threw it away." The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Rain lashed against the windows like a drumbeat. Daniel took another step forward, voice shaking now, no longer from fear, but from clarity. I remember her scream, he said. I remember you standing behind her. She turned to you, not to me. Right before she fell, she said your name. Hayes's confidence faltered. You don't know what you're talking about. Daniel's eyes burned. You pushed her. Hayes's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his drink, trying to regain control. She tripped. You were drunk. Everyone knows that. Daniel moved closer, his voice a whisper now, sharp as broken glass. You can't rewrite what happened anymore. Hayes set the glass down too hard. The sound shattered the tension like thunder. You think anyone will believe a homeless drunk over me? You're nothing, Daniel. You've always been nothing. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, a small digital recorder. Its red light blinked quietly in the dark. Hayes froze. Daniel's voice was steady. Maybe they won't believe me, but they'll believe you. Hayes lunged across the desk, but Daniel stepped back fast, the recorder clenched in his fist. Don't do this, Hayes hissed. You'll destroy her. You'll destroy Emily. Daniel's voice broke. No, you already did. For a moment, neither moved. Then Hayes exhaled, a low, venomous sound. You think truth saves people. It doesn't. It burns them alive. He turned toward the window, and in that moment the world seemed to slow. Daniel saw the flash of lightning illuminate Hayes's face, pale and furious, the reflection of the city trembling behind him. Then Hayes moved, fast, reaching for the drawer. Daniel's instincts surged. He lunged forward, grabbing Hayes's wrist just as the drawer slammed open, a gun glinting inside. They struggled, crashing against the desk, glass shattering around them. The recorder hit the floor, still blinking red. Thunder roared outside, drowning out everything but the sound of their labored breathing. Hayes shoved Daniel hard, sending him into the shelves. Books and framed photos tumbled down. The gun skittered across the marble floor. Daniel crawled for it, his fingers brushing metal, but Hayes was faster. The gun cocked, the click sharp and final. End of the story, Hayes said quietly. Daniel froze. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw the blinking red light of the recorder. It was still running. Hayes hadn't noticed. Daniel met his gaze. You're right. This is the end of your story. Hayes sneered. Then his expression shifted, confusion flickering across his face as a voice called from the doorway. Drop it, Richard. Hayes turned. Claire stood there, drenched from the rain, her hands shaking but her eyes steady. Beside her was a uniformed officer, the same one from the photograph, older now, haunted. For a moment, the world stood still. The storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling. You lied to me. You said he killed me. You said it was his fault. Hayes's jaw tightened. I protected you. No, she said softly. You protected yourself. The officer stepped closer, hand on his weapon. We recorded everything, Hayes, every word you just said. Hayes looked at Daniel, the disbelief, the fury, the realization all crashing through his face at once. You set me up. Daniel shook his head slowly. You set yourself up the moment you opened your mouth. For a heartbeat, everything was silent except the rain. Then Hayes's shoulders slumped. The gun fell from his hand and hit the marble floor with a hollow thud. The officer moved forward, cuffing him with a quiet efficiency that felt almost unreal. Claire stood frozen, tears mingling with the rain on her face. As they led Hayes out, Daniel bent down and picked up the recorder. The tiny red light still blinked. Proof. Outside, the storm was breaking. The first streaks of dawn bled through the clouds, soft and tentative. The rain eased, turning into a mist that made the city shimmer like a new world being washed clean. Claire turned to him, her voice small. I never thought I'd see this day. Daniel looked at her. The years of pain etched deep, but softening now, just a little. Neither did I. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the police car disappear into the grey light. Then Claire whispered, What happens now? Daniel exhaled, his breath trembling in the cold morning air. Now, maybe we start over. But even as he said it, he knew nothing could ever go back to what it was. Some wounds don't close, they just change shape. The city below was waking up. Horns, footsteps, the sound of life returning. Daniel felt the weight of it all pressing down, the truth, the loss, the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this time, it would matter. As they walked out of the building together, he reached into his jacket and took out the photograph one last time. The edges were torn now, the faces faded. But this time, it didn't hurt to look at it. He let it go. The photo drifted through the air, caught in the wind, tumbling out into the dawn until it vanished against the skyline. He turned to Claire. "Where's Emily?" "She's at home," she said softly. "She doesn't know yet." Daniel nodded. "Then let's tell her together." They started walking side by side, through the quiet streets washed clean by rain. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered, in puddles, in broken glass, in hearts that would never be the same again. As they turned the corner, Daniel looked up at the light breaking through the clouds. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't name. Not joy, not peace exactly, but something close. And beneath the hum of the waking city, he thought he could almost hear it, the sound of life finding its way back after the storm. But far away, in the quiet of an empty holding cell, Richard Hayes sat alone, staring at the grey wall in front of him. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't to anyone but himself. "They'll never believe him," he whispered. "They never do." Outside, thunder rumbled one last time. Low, distant, fading. And for the first time, Daniel didn't flinch. The sun climbed slowly over the skyline, spilling pale gold light across the wet pavement. Morning mist curled through the streets, softening the hard edges of the city that had spent the night thrashing beneath the storm. The world felt quiet again, tentative, as if it too was holding its breath after everything that had broken and washed away. Daniel walked beside Claire, their steps slow, unhurried. The air smelled of rain and iron, that scent of new beginnings that always came after destruction. For a long while, neither spoke. Words felt too heavy, too fragile. When they reached Claire's apartment building, the morning had turned clear, the clouds peeling away like the final pages of a story. The city was awake now, car horns in the distance, shop shutters opening, children's voices echoing down the block. Life was moving on, indifferent to the lives it had almost forgotten. Inside, the apartment was small and warm. There were drawings on the fridge, mismatched furniture, a faint trace of cinnamon from the night before. It wasn't much, but it was alive. It was home. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, a bowl of cereal in front of her, her hair still damp from a shower. When she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, she froze, spoon mid-air. "Dad?" she whispered. The word hit him like sunlight after years underground. He managed a small nod. Claire rested a hand on their daughter's shoulder. "He's home," she said softly. For a long moment, Emily didn't move. Then she rose, slowly, uncertainly, as if afraid he might disappear again. Daniel opened his arms, hesitant, trembling, and she ran into them. The sound she made wasn't a cry, but something deeper, something that had waited years to be released. He held her close, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the faint scent of soap and the familiar warmth of family he thought he'd lost forever. She was shaking, but so was he. The kind of shaking that comes when the body realizes it's safe again. "I missed you," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "I missed you more than you'll ever know." When she finally pulled back, her eyes searched his face. "Mom said you were gone, because of something bad." Daniel hesitated. The truth hovered there, sharp, heavy, full of pain. But then he saw himself reflected in her eyes, and for the first time he understood what kind of truth mattered. "I made mistakes," he said softly, "but I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." She studied him, then nodded slowly, as if something inside her, something old and uncertain, had just started to heal. Claire watched from across the room, her eyes full of tears she didn't bother to hide. When Daniel looked at her, she smiled faintly, a smile that carried both apology and forgiveness. The morning passed quietly. They sat together, sharing breakfast like a family, trying to remember how to exist in the same moment again. Emily talked about school, about a painting she'd made that won first place in art class. Daniel listened like each word was a gift. After she left for school, the apartment fell silent again. Claire stood by the window, watching her daughter walk away down the street. Daniel joined her, the city reflected in the glass, like 1,000 tiny versions of the life they'd lost and found again. "She doesn't remember much," Claire said quietly, "just bits and pieces. I used to think that was a blessing. Now I'm not sure." Daniel nodded. "Sometimes forgetting is mercy. Sometimes it's just survival." They stood there for a moment longer before she turned to him. "What will you do now?" He thought about it, really thought. For years, his only purpose had been to survive the day, to keep moving through the ache. Now, for the first time, the road ahead wasn't empty. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe that's a good thing." Claire smiled, a small, tired smile. "You could stay, at least for a while." He looked at her, at the woman who had once loved him, who had betrayed him out of fear and saved him out of guilt. There was too much history between them to name, but beneath it all, something new had taken root. Not the old love, but something quieter, steadier, understanding. "I'd like that," he said. For a few days, Daniel stayed. He helped around the apartment, fixed a leaky faucet, walked Emily to school. The world felt surreal. Simple things like holding a cup of coffee in the morning light or hearing laughter echo down a hallway became small miracles. He had spent years invisible, yet here he was, finally seen. But the past had a way of echoing, even in silence. The trial, the lies, the headlines, they would surface again. The news began to spread. Business magnate Richard Hayes arrested in connection with decades-old manslaughter cover-up. The city buzzed with disbelief. Some called it justice. Others called it tragedy. Daniel didn't watch the interviews or read the papers. He didn't need to. The world would tell its version of the story, and it would move on. For him, it was enough to breathe again without the weight of someone else's lie pressing down on his chest. One evening, he stood on the rooftop of Claire's building, watching the city lights flicker like distant fires. The air was cool, quiet, carrying the faint hum of life below. Claire joined him, her sweater pulled tight around her shoulders. "They'll probably want you to testify again," she said softly. He nodded. "I will." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're not angry?" He thought about that. The years lost, the nights spent in the dark, the ache that had become a second heartbeat. "I was," he said finally, "but anger keeps you in the same place. I've been there too long." They stood together in silence, the city stretching endlessly below them. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured faintly, a ghost of the storm that had passed. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, "that everything we went through happened for a reason?" Daniel watched a plane cross the night sky, its lights blinking like a promise. "I don't know if there's a reason," he said, "but I think sometimes life breaks us to show us what we're made of, what we can survive." She turned to him, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "And what are you made of, Daniel?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from a place deeper than words, still figuring that out. When he went to bed that night, The city was quiet. Through the open window, he could hear the wind whispering through the trees, the distant rhythm of life returning to its usual pulse. But something had shifted, not in the world outside, but in him. He dreamed of that night years ago, not the crash, not the chaos, but the moments before, the laughter, the warmth, the sound of his daughter's small feet running through the house. In the dream, Claire was there too, smiling in the kitchen light, untouched by time or tragedy. And for once, when he woke, the dream didn't hurt. A week later, he walked Emily to school. She held his hand the whole way, her small fingers wrapped around his like a secret she didn't want to lose. When they reached the gate, she stopped. "Dad," she said. "Yeah? Are you going away again?" He knelt down, meeting her eyes. "No," he said, "not this time." She smiled, the kind of smile that mends something inside you without words, and ran off to join her friends. He watched her go until she disappeared into the crowd. For a long moment, he stood there, feeling the morning sun on his face, the air sharp and alive with possibility. Then he turned and started walking. Not away, not toward, just forward. Later that afternoon, he returned to the park where it had all begun, the place where he'd saved a child and unknowingly found his own. The bench was still there, old and worn. He sat down, listening to the laughter of children echoing across the grass. The city stretched around him, alive and imperfect, filled with both cruelty and grace. He thought about Hayes, about Claire, about all the choices that had led him here, the broken roads that somehow still carried him home. He closed his eyes and took a slow breath, letting the noise of the world fade until all that remained was the quiet thrum of his heart. Sometimes, life doesn't give you happy endings, he thought. It gives you second chances, messy, fragile, and unfinished. But maybe that's what makes them real. The wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of church bells. The sun dipped low, bathing the park in amber light. Daniel opened his eyes, and for the first time in years, he didn't see ghosts, only the living, moving, breathing world before him. He rose, slipping his hands into his coat pockets, and started down the path toward home. The sky above him was wide open, streaked with gold and violet. The city shimmered like a promise reborn. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet thought took shape. Not an answer, but a question, soft and infinite. If losing everything is what it takes to truly see what matters, was it ever really a loss at all? The wind carried his breath away, blending it with the hum of the world. He didn't look back, and as the light faded, the camera of life pulled wider, the man who had once been broken walking steady beneath a sky that for the first time seemed to forgive him.